Toronto or Edmonton, bigger disappointment?
Well, I'll tell you what. On Friday it was Toronto, and on Sunday it was Edmonton. I think that there was some real belief that once the Boston Bruins were eliminated, Toronto had an easy path to get to the easier path to get to the Stanley Cup final. And the way the Oilers looked against Los Angeles, and really in many ways had the game under control in Game 3 in Vegas, I think there was a real thought that they were destined to go to the Stanley Cup final too. So to me, I would almost give it a tie. The fan bases of both teams are so passionate about what their teams do. They have elite players, and I think the disappointment in Edmonton is matched only by the disappointment in Toronto.
What's your sense as to what's happening behind the scenes right now in Toronto?
Well, I think it's far too soon to think that we're going to have a verdict in the next 24 hours. I think it's important to think that this goes all the way to the board. It's funny, Nick, 15 years ago, everything revolved around what the board said, what the board did. And we always talked about the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund and their control of this club, and they didn't understand what it was like to play the game. And what Brendan Shanahan did in a magnificent way was to take the pressure off the board. And he deserves credit for that. He put a face to the franchise. So the question becomes is if the board sits down, and the board is Rogers, Bell, and two people representing Larry Tannenbaum's company. If that's the case, is Brendan Shanahan given a vote of confidence in order to try to reinvent the team? Or just say, hey, status quo, Brendan, you keep doing what you want to do? Or does the board sit back and say, you know what? This is really disappointing again, and we have to reevaluate not just what happens on the hockey operations side, but we have to manage what Brendan Shanahan does too. And that I think I'm not suggesting that there's an impending meeting, but I think that discussion will probably happen at some point amongst the board members to figure out what the heck's going to go on with the Maple Leafs.
Because I think that was my fascination. And again, as we have this conversation, it's locker room cleanout day for the Maple Leafs. But that was my fascination with the fact that Brendan Shanahan would not be addressing the media on Monday. Are we reading too much into that? Like, what do you make of that whole situation?
I think we are. I think today is, the hard and fast rule that you have to hear from the players as they put their stuff into green garbage bags. And then, you should hear from Sheldon one more time, who now has 72 hours to reflect on what happened in Game 5. And, whether Kyle is going to say anything cryptic or Kyle's going to say anything that is mandatory listen is another interesting thing. I can almost bet, though, that he will come across as intelligent. He will come across as compassionate. He will come across as somebody who understands what this team needs. And then we'll figure out what happens in the next week or two.
I'm sure you guys will have the conversation on your show, and make sure to go check that out if you're watching or listening right now with Bob McCown. But what happens now? Because even talking to friends and other media members the last couple of days, people are already pitching names like Tom Wilson. In your opinion, what you saw here in the Stanley Cup playoffs, what needs to happen next from the Maple Leafs perspective?
Well, the one thing that this the insanity of beating your head against the wall for the last few years, if you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, is you've got to understand that the playoffs are that much different than the regular season. And do you have a team built for the Stanley Cup playoffs? Do you have enough grit? Do you have enough depth in your roster to play for the Stanley Cup? I think the best example right now of how many teams are left? Seven? Six? Five. Yeah, five. Yeah. That's right. 5 teams left. I think the best examples are Seattle and Vegas. And why are they that way? Well, they're relentless. Both teams are relentless. Both teams are deep. And both teams have really strong defenses. So, okay, that's a pretty good blueprint to start with. If I would have told you that, sure the top six forwards in Toronto are outstanding, but are they deeper than the Seattle Kraken or the Vegas Golden Knights? Deeper? 12 guys in? I think you might have a question mark. You might say, well, it's pretty darn close. I mean, the thing with Seattle and Vegas is that you can't match lines because they just roll them and they all look the same. So that's Stanley Cup playoff hockey. You look at the strength of what has happened in Vegas with Alex Pietrangelo and Alec Martinez and Braden McNabb. That is a really big, heavy defense. Shea Theodore when he's 100% healthy. Do the Maple Leafs have a defense that good? No, they don't. So those are the blueprints that I think you have to start to work with, and you have to say, okay, the 82 games are fun. It's great, and it's great to go to the game on Wednesday night or Saturday night and have a good time, a social out. But do you want to win the Stanley Cup or do you want to win the regular season? Nobody walks down the street and says, there goes the President's Trophy winning team. There's no parade. And so I think there has to be a paradigm shift in how you build your hockey club in order to win playoff games. And I think Kyle thought he's done that. I think Kyle thinks he's done that a couple of times. He always does the same thing at the deadline. He goes out and tries to find leadership and gritty players. But it's too late by that, because it's a culture thing too, I think. I think there's something to be said for that. And so there has to be a change in the blueprint somehow, some way. And hopefully Kyle gets a chance. In my opinion, I hope Kyle gets a chance to do the blueprint. But, I think everything's on the table right now.
Oh, without question. I think the other thing I noticed of the teams remaining is you look at the trade deadline, all this conversation about the New York Rangers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Boston Bruins, and it's, more times than not, especially this year, it's the teams that really didn't do much. Remember how much flack the Carolina Hurricanes got, outside of Shane Gostisbehere, they were really, really quiet. And maybe it shows you that I think we overvalue to an extent the trade deadline. But to me, that's the big conversation, certainly in this market, the core.
You think?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
we fall for it every year, Nick. We fall for it every year because it's cool. Guys getting traded. Wow, that's cool. We live in the aura of Butch Goring. That was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was 42 years ago. Come on. There's something to be said for building a culture from September, not from March 3rd.
So I love to point fingers on this show. Blame. Like, it's going to be a big word used throughout this week. Who deserves, most or the brunt of the blame in John Shannon's world for this loss here against Florida?
I think the core four do. I really do. I think the four players do. They're the ones that are on the front line. They're the ones that are getting paid the big money. They're the ones that the expectation is that, if you can score 40 goals in the regular season, you should be able to score goals in the playoffs. Now, without making excuses, and hopefully we'll find out today more information, but who played hurt and how hurt were they? We all know that everybody's sore. We all know that there's bumps and bruises, but is there a wrist that's with a hairline fracture? This is the hard part of judging and making judgment calls in a scenario like this, Nick, where you get angry with the players because, come on, why can't they do it? What's wrong? And then we find out later, well, he was playing with two broken toes, and it's hard to skate. It's hard to get your boot on, and I'm waiting to hear that. It in many ways, and I said this to somebody about Edmonton yet last night. They said, do you think anybody's hurt? I said, I hope so. I hope they're hurt because some of them didn't play very well. And I think you almost have to say, is somebody on the Maple Leafs hurt? Well, I almost hope so that there's a built-in excuse, a real reason, not an excuse, a real reason why they weren't able to elevate their game like they did in the regular season.
Yeah, and I think it was just really unfortunate, to your point, that you finally win a playoff series in 19 years, and that's the way you come out for game three. Like, they were good in game one and two. Just the puck bounces, the puck luck didn't go their way, and then they're down 2-0, and then just a complete no-show, John,
I
for
don't
game
buy
three.
that. I,
No?
I don't buy that. I think I heard you say game three was the most important game. Games one and two set the narrative. Games
Sure.
one and two set the narrative. Why can't they get the puck luck? Why aren't they providing the extra effort to get that break once in a while? That to me, I mean, if you had a choice, let me ask you this question right now.
Yeah.
If you had a choice, dude, Matthew Tkachuk and Austin Matthews, who would you take?
Honestly, probably Kachuk right now.
Right.
Probably Kachuk. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, so, well, why? Matthews is bigger. Matthews has a better shot. Matthews is a better skater. But why can't he play like Matthew Tkachuk? That becomes the whole question. And I mean, I actually, I've never been a Marner fan all my life, but I'll tell you what, I would never get rid of Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner is the modern day Dave Keon. I think Mitch Marner, you put Marner out on the ice and Marner does exactly what he needs to do every time. He tries his hardest. He leaves it out there. I don't know him as a person, but when you consider that, every scenario the Maple Leafs had something going on, 5-on-5, killing penalties on the power play, Mitch Marner was there, and I would never, ever touch Mitch Marner when it came to this roster.
So let me ask you this. I think the consensus out there's going to be changes. In what way, we don't know just yet. But what's the likelihood the Leafs make a blockbuster trade this summer, in your opinion?
Well, they have to look at it, because I don't think you can go to camp in the middle of September and have that group of players look around the room and say, here we go again. Groundhog Day's in February, not the 15th of September.
Yeah.
And so not to beat a dead horse here about Matthews, but what is different about this scenario this summer in Toronto versus what Matthew Tkachuk did in Calgary last summer? Get his in. Do you want to sign here, Austin? Well, I'm not sure. Well, we can't take that risk. You can't take that risk. So that to me is where this all starts. So whether that's a blockbuster or something happens, it all has to start with, what are you going to do with Austin Matthews? Are you going to pay him $14 million? I mean, he's going to be close to that number. It's going to be close to that number. And I think you have to look at this whole thing and say, what does he fit into what we need long term? And if you say, well, sure he does. Look at him, great player. Rocket Richard winner, 60 goals, 40 goals. This is about winning the Stanley Cup. This is not about individual awards. This is not about scoring goals. This is about WINS. And they have to figure out and decide that. They have to figure out, and I'm saying the management of this team has to, and they have to figure out this from the perspective of, do the players really want to win as badly as you do and Jay does and every Maple Leaf fan in town.
Yeah, and I'll say to wrap too, like, just watching some of these guys go after personal accomplishments late in the regular season had me wondering watching some playoff games. That's all I'll say, John. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, but that's natural in a long season, an 82-game season. It's a long season. But you have to maintain your focus overall. You do. You have to maintain that focus. I mean, here we are. We're talking about one of the greatest Leaf regular season teams of all time, and we're trying to blow it up.
True.
You're trying to blow it up. And how logical is that? And the only other thing is I would say is, from the perspective of people saying, well, we got to get rid of Kyle. Kyle's no good. Kyle can't do this. If not Kyle, then who? That's the other issue. I mean, this is not a great season for available managers. This is not a great season for available coaches. And, you know, and I think there's a few teams out there trying to figure that out and finding that out as we speak.